Welcome to the Tax Awareness Show. My name is Shilpo Mutiba. I'm your host. And today on the Government Pulse, we're really going to look into some of the topical, or rather, some of the critical, significant news that really we saw taking place in South Africa. And in the studio today, I'm with the ATM Parliamentary Leader, Vuyo Zungula. Guys, welcome and thank you so much for honoring our invitation.
Thank you so much, and it is an honor and a privilege to be part. We last spoke in Cape Town.
Yes,
and I think we had a good conversation.
Correct.
And I think it's always encouraging for us to keep on having these conversations.
Exactly. We need that dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, let me take you back. It was on the 6th of July, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember I was sitting reading Sunday newspapers, and for some reason, as usual, you before soccer games, you say, let me watch what's happening on the news channel. And here is Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi really, giving us some of the serious allegations around Minister of Police, by then Minister of Police, Mkhwanazi. What really, when you saw that press briefing, what was your first reaction?
It was shock, honestly. Shocked that a police commissioner has to go to such extents, maybe to speak about the wrongs that are happening in that police ministry. But at the same time, we're not surprised. I was not surprised because we all know how corrupt the system is. We'll never believe that, corruption is everywhere. And we don't have corruption in the most critical institution, which is SAPS or the police, because that institution is the reason why people get arrested or they will not get arrested. So it was shock, but we're not surprised at the same time.
How important was that briefing, to be honest?
Very, very important, because I think it should have inspired other public servants to say, in doing your work, at times you need to come out, and if you are frustrated, you are sidelined, and you are constrained by the powers that be that want to continue destabilizing and destroying the country, you need to take a stand and just communicate to the public about the wrongs that are happening in the country. And I think, and I really hope that other public servants would have been inspired to say, if you do right by the people will have your back. Because if you go across different platforms, I was in Rhodes 2 weeks ago, and the students there were actually saying, Viva Mkhwanazi. He's not even a politician. He's not even campaigning to be a politician. But because of his bravery and his act of, speaking out against wrongdoing, people resonated with him so much. So I really hope other public officials and servants do take note that they must not just be active participants in the destruction of our country. They must speak out whenever the need arises.
Maybe let me tap on exactly what you just said. You're saying the student will say Viva Mkhwanazi. And to me sounds like the community and the public at large have lost trust in government. By them saying that, it sounds like they're looking for that savior. How did you read that?
Definitely, they're looking for a savior. The complex history of our country and the psychology of many African countries, they are savior or messianic inclined. That's why you're going to have people following an individual, regardless of the policies and the ideology, but they believe in an individual. That's why even what happened in Burkina Faso, when Captain Traoré stepped in, then it had a ripple effect in other countries as well, because not only in South Africa, but in the entire continent, people have lost trust and hope in the government. So they're not looking now for political parties or maybe these sophisticated organizations, but they're rather looking for individuals that will represent them and people who when they speak the heart and the mind of the people. So I think at that time, General Mkhwanazi really spoke and resonated with the people, with a lot of people at that time.
Maybe just to give a context, maybe let's go back and give a context for someone who might not be up to date with what's happening. What are these allegations that, a lot has happened. I know that you also, and we're going to touch on that, you wrote letters to the public protector, but we'll get into that. Just to set a scene, what are these allegations, just to give a context, what are these allegations that Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi have raised against the then Minister of Police?
I think chief among them was the issue of collusion between the Minister of Police with criminal networks, and also the disbandment of the political killings task team, which was operating largely in KZN, and basically the misleading of Parliament. I think those were the critical issues. But the key issue was the issue of how it seems as if Minister Mchunu is embedded with criminal networks who know what the minister will do. And then these criminal networks, they advise other criminals that this is what the Minister of Police will do. And it gives an impression that the Minister of Police is not acting in the best interest of the people, is not acting in the best interest of society when it comes to making decisions in that particular department, but rather he seems to be acting in the interest of the criminals he's got some form of relations with.
Speaking of that, the picture that you are painting is really scary. If we fund our security cluster, if that is true, what is being alleged, because there's still various investigations, and maybe to bring closer to you, you also wrote a letter, I think on the 7th of July, to the public protector. Maybe take us through what drove you to write that letter, and what is the current status around that particular letter to the public protector?
What we wanted from the public protector was to do an investigation in terms of EMEA, which looks at the conduct of of government ministers, including the president, when it comes to how they conduct themselves, whether based on what was alleged by General Mkhwanazi, are the actions of Minister Mchunu in line with the Executive Members Ethics Act? Because there's an act that regulates that a person who occupies a cabinet position must act in the interest of the public, and other provisions. So that was the nature of our complaint, and particularly on the question of him misleading Parliament, because he in March goes to Parliament and says he does not know a certain individual that was alleged to be the one that is facilitating his meetings with some of these people who are involved in criminal networks. He said he does not know them. Yet General Mkhwanazi had proof that actually not only does he know him, but there's some form of a relation between him, Minister Mchunu, and this particular individual. So lying to Parliament in accordance to the powers and privileges is a criminal offense, is something that it could be sanctioned on. So that was what we were hoping that the public protector. Now, the public protector is a creature of statute. The office is given certain powers in accordance to the Constitution, and one of those powers is that due to the urgency of ethical violations, they need to provide a report within 30 days. It is not something that was picked up by ATM or by anyone. It is something that is there in the Public Protector Act. Now, when we wrote that on the 7th, now we are on the 21st of August. We only got like an acknowledgement that, okay, sure, we've received your complaint, we acknowledge it. But due to how the Public Protector has handled other investigations in the past, I remember Pala, she called us to a meeting after Advocate Mkhwebane was removed. They were called to a meeting by one of the investigators to seek to understand more information about our complaint on that Phala matter. Similarly, we also had a complaint on the spaza shops issue and how it seems as if the government does not have mechanisms to protect children from consuming fake or illicit products in that sector. She had we had a meeting with them to explain the nature of our complaint. From 7th of July to the 21st, not even once have we met with that office. We're not saying we must meet with the public protector, but someone from that office to understand the true nature of our complaint. So you can't have a case whereby the law says in 30 days a report must be submitted. Yet in over 47 days, we've never have even had a meeting, like an initial meeting to understand. And one would even assume that even General Mkhwanazi has not been interviewed. One would even assume that nothing has been has happened when it comes to that particular investigation. If we, as the complainants, there's nothing that has moved. So that is the state of the report.
Do you think Public Protector takes these investigations serious? And if not, what options do you have? What other legal avenues are you guys looking at exploring?
It's not a matter of the public protector taking the report seriously, but I think it is the politicization of Chapter 9 institutions. I can take you back to Phala, because when Phala was in the office of the public protector, then she was the deputy public protector. The issue then was that the person she was supposed to investigate objectively was the very same person in terms of the powers that be, had the authority to appoint her as a public protector. So obviously, people know where their bread is buttered. So they will align closer to the side of where their bread is buttered. So we think it's not a matter of taking it seriously. Rather, it's a matter of people wanting to ascend in terms of their careers to the detriment of their office, the office they hold, and our constitution.
But I mean, maybe let's reflect on this scandal. What perception does it reflect on government in preaching for accountability and transparency for that matter? Now you've got also these delays. I know that there's a parallel investigation that it's been done. I think Parliament has one, and there's one by a retired chief. I think it was a deputy chief justice, acting deputy chief justice. And there seems to be sort of a slow snail pace movement around these investigations, together with yours that you lodged, or you asked the public protector to actually undertake. What perception does it leave the government? Particularly, we already earlier on spoke of this growing public distrust between the community and the government.
You know, the reality is that if the person that is at the wrong side, doing wrong things in our society, if that person has some form of political power, you will see such things. There's going to be delays. There's going to be issues of, pushing things from pillar to post. But if it's another person who does not have political power, who does not have money, because in South Africa, to be exempt from the laws that we have, you need two things. You need to have political connections or have political power, and you need to be wealthy. That is the state of our country. So that is the reality in which we are facing. So to see the government, even in this case, applying the very same delay tactics, now it will never inspire confidence to citizens to say, if you have political power or you are a government minister and you are found in the wrong, because at the basic level, some of the allegations by General Mkhwanazi are very clear that the violations of the constitution. Now, the president of the country does not need a commission of inquiry, does not need a report from the public protector, does not need even parliament to institute an inquiry, because at the front that Minister Mkhunu involved himself in operational affairs of the police ministry in violation of Section 207 of the Constitution. That is enough And there's a letter from Minister Mkhwanazi. He owns it. And if you look at the contents of the letter, it is very clear that he overstepped his mandate. Now, what does the president do? He says no commission of inquiry, simply because he wants to protect someone who protected him by concealing the IPID report on Palapal. So what this does is that instead of South Africa at least coming closer in terms of turning the ship around to improve public confidence and trust in the functioning and operations of government, instead we are going deeper and deeper by such actions.
Maybe let me paint a picture and take you back to Minister of Finance budget speech. One of the things when he referred to the fruitless expenditures that are within the government sphere was lack of consequence management.
Yeah.
And you can cut across. Recently, we saw even him, the Minister of Finance, writing the letter to the mayor of Johannesburg around this issue of unauthorized and irregular and fruitless expenditures. But then I'm bringing it back to this issue around this issue of snail pace investigations, meaning that we seems not to be holding public officials accountable.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a culture that it's sort of embedded in the government systems. How important it is to hold public officials accountable, particularly those that are in the wrongdoings.
If you are a public official, public representative, if you know that you'll be held accountable, I can tell you now, you will do things the right way. But if you know that you can evade accountability by being protected politically by the powers that be, or maybe you've got compromised individuals in some of these law enforcement agencies or Chapter 9 institutions who can assist you to evade accountability, then corruption, maladministration, mismanagement of funds will always be the order of the day, because people know that it is not about doing wrong. Rather, it is about you've got people that will protect you when you've done wrong. So, and here, I think if we can remind your viewers that, a few years ago, Mbathabile Dlamini said, we have smallanyana skeletons.
The
famous line, we've got smallanyana skeletons. It shows how you can't, if I know your skeletons, you can't speak out against my skeletons. Because immediately speak out against my skeletons, I'll be saying, all right, fine, I've been taken to court, but don't forget, so-and-so has done 1, 2, 3. So you find that now the ANC as an organization will inculcate that culture to the rest of government systems, whereby they are going to protect each other, because if one person gets arrested, there's a fear that other people will be arrested as well. You remember, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, Uzizi Kodwa. There was some arrest, jiki. Charges are dropped, life continues. And you ask yourself, if the NPA moved to an extent of having charges because he appeared in court, what went wrong? What changed? Because it can't be that there are some charges and jiki. Those charges do not even translate into an actual hearing. It is about the culture that the ANC is embedded in order to protect themselves as corrupt individuals, that once you've got compromised people around in government, no one will stand up and fight for what is right and push for accountability.
To hold other people accountable, you also need stronger structures, it could be things like the old scorpions. And we've got this culture of destroying things that are working. And I'm bringing back to this issue around alleged disbandment of political killing task team. Maybe take me through that. I mean, what goes behind the minds of, but it's allegations. What goes behind someone really wanting to destroy something that it really seems to be doing amazing work. And what do you think the disbandment of that have an impact on the victims for that matter, and including the safety of the communities?
Yeah. The political killings task team, it will be like if, for example, it was a business killing task team, one would assume that the people who are behind the actual killings, it is business people. Either they're fighting for deals, they're fighting for the market, etc. Now, if it's a political killings task team, one would not even need to look anywhere else. They need to know that it is politicians who are behind the killings of other politicians. Therefore, once you have an effective political killings task team, there's a chance that people, your comrades in your own organizations, are going to be found that they are the ones actually who have been instigating the killings of other people for political reasons. So it does not come as a shock or as a surprise when this team is arresting people, having over 121 dockets, that one is going to panic and shut it down. It is because perhaps the people in those dockets who are implicated are his comrades, are his people that he wants to protect. However, it is something that is so sad because it means the victims will never have closure. They will never have justice, and they will never have confidence in terms of the governance system of our country if an institution or a task team that is doing work and seemingly even assisting other provinces in terms of, because the political killings task team was not only dealing with the issues concerning the political killings, because political killings will affect, for example, drug dealing, will affect other forms of criminality. So it's not going to be confined in that. So there'll never be justice. There'll never be governance that is giving confidence to the people that their problems are actually heard by the government, and the government will act decisively to eradicate those problems.
Maybe let me bring this issue of Ntate Mthunu and bring it to the political maneuvering of ANC. How do you, from outside and being maybe let's make you wear a political analyst head, how do you see these playing out in terms of the internal leadership battles and particularly looking at, I think it's 2027 ANC conference?
ANC from 2022, if I'm not mistaken, they spoke about renewal, getting the ANC right, doing things the right way, taking a tough stance on corruption and any form of wrongdoing in public affairs. That's what they speak in terms of the political rhetoric. But practically so, they are acting in a way that is so opposed to that, because left, right and center, they protect compromised ministers. They protect people who are clearly found in the wrong. So I think what's going to happen in their own NC organizations, that the other people look and say, but you can't be preaching renewal, but you are working and encouraging or protecting people who are compromised. And it's going to give strength to the other people or other faction to say, you are basically misleading us, and you are basically using the term of renewal as something to just make us to focus on other people, because when actions are taken against certain groupings or certain people in the ANC, it's called renewal. But the very same principle or concept of renewal is not applied when a person is in the right side of the dominant faction, because that's how the ANC operates. If you are in the dominant faction, all your crimes are basically non-existent, no matter how big they are. But if you are in the wrong faction, all your crimes, no matter how small they are, you are going to be severely punished for them.
Maybe let's expand this issue of, and I mean, earlier on we spoke about the poor working or rather non-performance of the local government. And something that actually have a direct impact when there's a dysfunctional local government working, you'll typically have it affecting a lot of informal sectors. Because maybe to give a picture on that, when we start speaking about informal sectors, we'll have our mamas who are selling on the streets. We'll have spaza shops. I don't know if you still even have local people owning spaza shops. That's how unfortunate the issue. Maybe also speaking of spaza shops, I want to take you back to the letter that you wrote to the Competition Commission. Maybe give us a context of what moved you to write that letter to the Competition Commission.
At a practical level, you see from time to time people arrested for being illegal in the country. For, I think this year alone, I could count about 5 different occasions whereby 80 Ethiopians are found in some house in Centurion, 70 Ethiopians in some house in East Rand. Now, all of these people are trafficked to South Africa. Now, a person who comes with only the clothes they wear, they then go settle in communities, whether it's in townships or in villages, are suddenly running spaza shops. Where do they get the capital? Where do they get the networks to know this is where to buy? Where do they get the necessary infrastructure to actually start running businesses? So it gives an impression that there is a syndicate that is operating in that particular sector. And this syndicate destroys competition from local spaza shop owners. That is why in Ratanda, there's many local spaza shop owners who have cried at the fact that they are targeted or getting threats by foreigners who are operating in that space to say, don't open a spaza. That part of a business is reserved for them. So what we called the Competition Commission to do is to say, because this is a problem that will need a myriad of solutions. You need on one side Home Affairs to do its part. Correct. You need the Department of Small Business to do its part. Correct. But at the same time, you also need SARS to look into the issues of taxation. Also, you need the Competition Commission to say, do you have syndicates? Because if one, you are a Shilly boy wanting to open a spaza, and obviously when you want to open a spaza, you'll go to a certain establishment to stock, and you are going to be competing against a syndicate that is running 100 spazas, whereby when they stock for 100 spazas. Therefore, the price that you will sell, you will charge your products on. Because you do not have bulk discounts, you will not be able to reduce the prices. And at the same time, if this person is in a syndicate, they can charge, for example, 10 rands for a loaf of bread. Whereas when you buy from the bakery, the minimum cost price, it is 15 rand. So they will charge these prices just to get rid of you in the market. And also there's the issue of the illicit trade, whereby it is something that is prevalent not only in spazas, but in the entire informal sector. Like you stated, the informal sector is not confined to the spazas. If you go to Small Street, that's the informal sector. If you go to the China malls, it is the informal sector. So you are going to have the illicit trade that is so prevalent. One person was making a joke. In fact, it was not a joke, but he spoke about something that is sad, but in a context of it was humorous to say, if you go to those spaza shop owners and you want to buy a grandpa, instead of the headache going away, the headache will be worse. So that's how embedded illicit trade is in our country. I remember Ulatuma, who owns Mkhwanazi, yes, actually cried about the fact that you can literally go to a small street and buy a Mkhwanazi dress there for next to nothing. So that is why I wanted the Competition Commission to say they must step in to protect the economy, to protect livelihoods, to protect jobs, and not have a case whereby you've got an informal sector that has got so much criminality, whether it's a violation of immigration laws, violation of trade laws, or the illicit trade that is prevalent.
For this sector or for these syndicates to really thrive, something went wrong.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
Lack of enforcement, because the enforcement of laws, I grew up in a village. I can imagine if someone comes in the village to set up a shop, even if they speak the same language as us, inkosi or the councillor would at least try and find out, mfondini ungowakwabani uvelaphi, where do you come from? Even the elders, in the villages would not just rock up and start building. For you to just have inqiwa where you can build your house or set up anything, you need to be known. So what the lack of enforcement has done, it has allowed people without being known where they come from to basically set up shop. And when they set up shops and they operate, maybe they corrupted even Nkosi, they corrupted the councillors, they corrupted the powers that be in our communities to turn a blind eye into the potential dangers of having unknown people settling in communities, having distribution networks in terms of the food. So I think that is where we went wrong. It is a lack of enforcement, because all of these issues that people are raising when it comes to the informal economy, they are already provided in terms of the law. The issue is that when it comes to the enforcement of the law, then it becomes politicized to say, you can't do this because you're going to be appear as xenophobic, or you're going to be appear as what. But the law is the law. Hence, in other countries, I remember this, I think it's a minister from Zimbabwe. He proudly and boldly stated, and I agree so much with his sentiments. He was saying, no, here, what I'm doing is just implementing the laws of my country. If you want to politicize, you can do whatever. But me as a minister, I'm just implementing the law. But come to South Africa, you find that now our ministers, our mayors, the people who hold public office, who are executives, instead of having the very similar attitude to say, this is what the law says, and this is what they need to do in terms of whether they are ministers or they are mayors, in terms of implementing the law. They don't do that. Instead, they somersault. They try to, to navigate around things instead of just implementing the law.
What drives us not to implement the law? Because, like you said, the minister from Zimbabwe, as an example you gave, there seems to be execution. What drives this lack of execution? At
a broad level, I think it is a question of the lack of patriotism. Because when you are patriotic, it is not a matter of, let's say, it's foreigners versus citizens. Patriotism starts at a basic level when you are a teacher. When you know that you as a teacher have got a service to your country by imparting the necessary knowledge and skills to the people to the learners in your class. So that is something that is missing. That is why we are going to have teachers being absent when it comes to classes. And then the lack of patriotism then translates into other things, because once you receive money to turn a blind eye, it shows that you are not patriotic. If you are at the border, someone wants to come in and says, here's 5,000, I don't have papers, and you allow that person in, you're not a patriotic person. You can't be a policeman. You see someone who's clearly committing a crime, and when you want a cool drink, you are clearly not a patriotic individual. So patriotism is not about hating anyone. It is not a matter of citizens and non-citizens, but it is doing what is right in terms of the law and in terms of the best interests of the country.
You actually, when you speak of police turning blind eye, last night I was watching one of these documentaries, and this gentleman is one of these guys who hijack the cash in transit. And he boldly said that he buys these, I think it's bombs, or what do you call them? The explosives. Yeah, he buys this explosive from the mines, and I think he said he buys them between 200 and 400, somewhere there. And when he told the presenter there, he was like, yeah, even if they get me with these explosives, I'll just give them 10,000, I'll just give them 15,000, and they'll let me go. That's how deep this thing is.
You remember, sorry to cut you, remember who's this guy? I forgot his name, but he was arrested for illegal mining.
Yes, he had a famous name.
He had a famous name.
Yeah, I remember that.
But he never even made it to the police cell.
Yes.
That's how
What happened to that story? The story died out.
It died out. He never even made it to the police cell because from the time he's arrested, certain money or promises were exchanged and he was let go by the police. So that's why I'm saying the deeper problem that we have in our society, it is a lack of patriotism, because you'll never be a patriotic individual and in the police sense allow criminality to thrive, turn a blind eye. You can't be, for example, as a traffic officer, you see someone speeding, because they're going to cause accident. You can't be wanting a cool drink. You can't be a Chapter 9 institution instead of making investigation in accordance to the law, where now you want to make investigations to suit those that maybe you have political favors with. You can't do that. So that's why I'm saying the root cause of our problems is the fact that we have fewer people that have genuine love for their country. Most people that are in these positions, they are driven by self-interest and they're driven by the interest of just accumulating power to feed themselves. Because if you were to look at the nature of our problems, I was saying this other day, if you had people with just 10% of political will, all of our problems of unemployment, crime, poverty could be reduced significantly. Look at China. They had over 750 million people living in poverty in the 80s. Currently, I think it was 2016, that 750 million got reduced to about 7 million. In South Africa, Yona, is not even close to those millions. Where we are battling because the levels of poverty has increased instead of, being reduced. And that shows that there's lack of political will, because the question would be, what can China do for over a big number? Of course, 750 million people living in poverty, it is a very huge number. Whereas in South Africa, the population here has not exceeded 65 million. We're not saying that 65 million people are living in poverty. And we're not saying that we have a country that does not have resources, that does not have infrastructure.
We're rich in resources.
We're rich in resources, but we lack political will to rectify even the most basic problems.
Maybe it's quite disheartening. Maybe let's look at this issue. I follow a lot of budget issues, national treasury, fiscal policies. And one of these illicit financial flows, illicit trade that we speak about, the syndicates that we find them in this informal sector, the syndicates that we spoke about in the money industry. There's a lot of syndicates in this country. Maybe paint a picture how that has a severe, or how that really negatively impact the collections of revenue, the collections of tax in the country. And it's a serious tax evasion that, whether we like it or not, because then the government doesn't collect enough of the tax revenue, we end up having legal to really look and or finance or invest in our people, or for that matter, the public social wage is not enough because we don't have enough. We're not collecting enough. Maybe paint a picture. What's going on?
There's a person who said you can't be a criminal and not have politicians in your pocket, because it is the politicians that have got the power to turn a blind eye in all of your criminal activities. For example, look at the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry, the level of illicit trade there, 70% of the cigarettes that are smoked in our country, they are coming from illicit trade. And yes, there's, a few percent of tobacco products that are going to be coming from neighboring countries, in particular Zimbabwe. But majority of the trade, it is existing companies who under-declare in terms of their production, under-declare in terms of their sales, and they take all of those products, they move it via the black market. And when they're moving them via the black market, firstly, they do not pay taxes. And once they are not paying taxes, then I think on the tobacco trade, cigarette sales alone, the country is losing a minimum of 20 billion. Now, that is one industry. You can go to mining. It's something else. You can go to the other sectors. We're speaking about in excess of at least 500 billion that is lost by the taxmen on the illicit trade that is prevalent in our country. But you don't see now political will when it comes to these entities to say, we know there's a problem in terms of illicit trade, in terms of tobacco, but what mechanisms are they having to really curb out illicit trade in tobacco? Are they monitoring the productions of these tobacco companies? Are they monitoring how some of the gold, in South Africa, the illegal mining, we always make this assertion as a party to say there can never be illegal mining without the mining companies, because you're going to have a young boy coming from Mozambique, coming from Zimbabwe, underground mining. They will get the substance, the gold. But does he have the market? He will never have the market. Where does he know the market from? But the mine owners, they are the ones who are going to say, we're going to take this product and we're going to sell it. But when we're selling it, we are not going to be paying taxes. We are not going to be paying services to the government. So, in other words, the realities. So that is how the situation of illicit trade is affecting, because it reduces the amount that is there, that is availed to citizens. Hence, when we're making an argument, when they wanted to increase the VAT, we're asking to say, there's illicit financial flows, well documented. And by the way, we also wrote to the public protector to say, here's an elephant in the room, the concept of illicit financial flows, whereby over 400 billion is lost per annum. And this is not just something we picked up. There's a high-level panel review that was authored by the former President Mbeki, which showed the extent of illicit trade, not only in South Africa, but in the rest of the continent. And we said, public protector, please investigate systematic issues or systematic failures that enable illicit financial flows. She came back and said she can't investigate for one reason or the other. Now, hence we are saying that the lack of political will, and it is only towards these big companies, these big corporates. So you have a culture in our country whereby political will always be on the poor, will always be on the unemployed people, but the rich and the powerful, wealthy, multinational corporates, they are going to get away with murder, especially in the mining industry, and some of these industries whereby billions and billions are actually moved from South Africa to other countries. And the ripple effect of that is that there's going to be underdevelopment, and there's going to be the moving of priorities to say, instead of spending X amount on basic education, let's service debt, because when there's less revenue collected, the government is forced to go to the IMF and the World Bank to borrow more money. Hence, we're paying over 200 billion.
I think we're paying about 1.2 billion
1.2 a day on servicing debt. So
yes, debt servicing.
It shows how much the country now is in a debt cycle. As an individual, how much debt is, because some other people take up debt to service debt. So that is what currently are happening in the country. And you ask yourself, with illicit financial flows that are well documented to have our financial problems, why is there no appetite to go after them? Again, goes back to what I said earlier. You can never want to be criminal without having the politicians in your pocket, because it is those politicians that will protect you.
Maybe let's look at and speak for the voiceless and look at the impact of these syndicates in the local informal sector, the spaza shops. Maybe you can even broaden that. You earlier on you mentioned about small street, and you can broaden that. And the impact, the negative impact that it has on our local communities, for that matter, economic opportunities, but also for safety. Because there was a serious, unfortunate incident that happened where we lost young ones as a result of these issues around food. But even though I'm not sure how the investigations, it's still alleged because I don't have the correct information around that area. What is the impact of these on our local communities?
The impact is so devastating. Firstly, the issue of joblessness. Illicit trade gives it contributes to high unemployment levels, because if you've got uMaxhosa that has got a factory producing all of their products, then you've got someone that is going to fake these products in whatever back room or wherever place they're operating. If people now buy the fake Maxhosas, what's going to happen is that uMaxhosa will need to firstly tone down in terms of their production, because people are not buying authentic products, they're buying fake products. Secondly, it means people, once you tone down on production, you reduce production, you need to lay off some of the workers. That leads to high unemployment levels. From a health perspective, like you've stated, the issues of kids dying. Whilst on the food perspective, you can eat food now and maybe you can the consequences are going to be felt almost immediately. But there are some products whereby when consumed, like for example, illicit tobacco, maybe can take 10 years, 15 years. There's not enough studies. Yeah, there's not enough studies at the moment to show how consuming illicit tobacco products impacts your health at the long run. But even when it comes to illicit alcohol, I was watching a discourse on Twitter the other day where a person saying, what's up with this alcohol that they are consuming now? Because when they wake up, in fact, when they are drunk, they are going to be violently drunk. And they even got 3 bottles of ice trope. You could see that in terms of the texture and the color, it is different. One was bought from a spa, Tops. One was bought, I think, from a club. Another, I think, was bought from...
I think I saw that video. It was trending.
Yeah, it was trending. So it shows the extent that when it comes to illicit trade, it is not something that is in a particular sector. Alcohol,
cut across,
tobacco, food, even hardware stores in the Eastern Cape, the zincs that our parents buy when they're building us houses there, you find that within 1 or 2 months, those zincs will be destroyed. They are unable
to handle the weight.
To handle the weight. Whereas back in the day, the hardware owners that were there, they were ethical people who provided proper products. So this has got so much negative effect. Also, when it comes to the issue of taxation and the increase of revenue in our country, because if now Maxhosa needs to close shop, it means he's not going to be able to pay taxes. No. Whereas the people who are involved in illicit trade, they pay no taxes. You can go to Small Street now. You can go to China Mall now. In terms of the monies they make on a year basis or in a, annually, they should be taxed. They should be paying taxes. But again, there's no political will. So that is the nature of our problem, that the impact of illicit trade cuts across from health, from law enforcement, from the increase of unemployment, and the reduction in terms of what is collected by the taxman.
Maybe let me separate. Let's come up with a solution. Let me separate. As ATM, now I'm referring back to you as for ATM purposes. What have to be done in order to deal with this part? But equally so, I'll allow you to expand. I saw that you met with a local spaza shop, a stakeholder. Maybe perhaps share with us the context to say, what are the issues that they are raising? What sort of help are they looking for? And then I think let's unpack that.
Yeah, the issue that they were raising, firstly, it was with the 500 million that was availed to South African spaza shop owners, that the requirements that have been put by the Department of Small Business, they do not take into account the the circumstances of South Africans, especially in the context of our history. Because you can't be wanting, for example, title deeds to say if you are living in a certain community, do you have a title deed? Because if a person has got a shack, maybe they will not have a title deed for that shack they're living in. But they are going to be using that shack as a spaza, selling people. So there's an active business that they are running. However, the issue then will be the department is like it's not taking into account the realities of majority of people will not have these documents. So that was the first issue. The second issue was the issue concerning illicit trade, whereby the view is to say they go to legitimate institutions, legitimate warehouses to buy legitimate products. Their competitors are going to have these syndicates that are manufacturing all of these products on their own, and they are obviously going to be cheaper, and they are not going to meet certain standards. Now, it's difficult to compete against illegality. It's difficult to compete against illicit products and illicit trade. So that is the nature of the conversation we had. And when we wrote to the Minister of Basic Education, we said, Minister, firstly, understand the context in which South Africans find themselves in terms of your requirements for South Africans to access this 500 million.
Sorry, the Minister of Small Business.
Small Business.
Yes, yeah.
And also, we said the question of illicit trade, it must not be, the issue of illicit trade, we hear it a lot, whereby people say, no, it's a law enforcement issue. It's like illegal mining. You can't have the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources saying it is a law enforcement issue, because there's some parts that are within the nature of that particular department to say, on the question of illegal mining, let's investigate, because they've got the capacity, they've got the resources. They are able to say, mine A says it produces X amount in terms of the gold, or mined X amount in terms of the gold. But when it comes to what they've sold, those it is slightly higher than what they've mined. Therefore, where did the rest come from? It is something that police may be handicapped in terms of reaching those conclusions. But when it comes to Department of Mineral Resources, they may have some information on that. So even when it comes to illicit trade in the spaza or informal sector, we said to the Minister of Basic Education, small business, they must have business inspectors, just like the Department of Employment and Labor has got labor inspectors. So what a labor inspector will do, they'll come here and check whether there's compliance in terms of the basic conditions of employment, COIDA, and other prescripts in terms of employment and labor. Now, we're motivating that if you're going to have business inspectors that are going to go to each and every small business to check compliance, if a person is not South African, are they legal in the country? Do they have trade licenses for them to trade? Are they registered for taxes? And are they paying taxes? If they're employing people, is the people that they're employing, are they employing South Africans? And because in terms of the law, Immigration Act, if you are trading, you need to invest, for example, a minimum of 5 million. So the business inspectors would then inspect all small businesses, whether there's compliance in terms of those. But she made a commitment, I think 2 or 3 years ago, in one of the department budget speeches, but up until today, there's no implementation, and we keep on pushing. So that is what we're proposing a solution to say, you don't need new laws, you don't need new interventions, you just need capacity on the ground to check whether there's compliance in terms of the law. And if there's no compliance, you shut them down.
You just answered my next question, because I was going to ask you the role of the government in dealing with these regulatory failures, particularly around this illegal trade and then the tax evasion. And you provided that practical example to say we need what you call business inspectors to really deal with these issues. But maybe let's from policy and regulations point of view, how can government actually play and ensure that its policies and it creates that fair competition within the sector, because the guys day in day out are really going out of business?
Yeah, that's where the government is really failing. This morning when I woke up, fortunately for me, I live next to the road. So I saw those guys who are pushing, I think it's scrap.
Oh, yes.
And I asked myself, the people that are in power, do they not have a conscience to an extent whereby their own native citizens are needing to push scrap around or collect scrap for them to make a living? Yet there are syndicates coming from all corners of the globe, coming to South Africa, making billions and billions in South Africa. And by the way, these billions do not benefit South Africans. They do not even benefit the South African economy, because these billions are shipped over to other countries. There's remittances that are sent back to China, sent back to Pakistan, to Bangladesh. And maybe one of the things you can maybe try investigate, because you are the expert in these things, try and maybe see the amount of remittances, especially from these companies like Omukuru, whereby their entire business model is about people in South Africa moving resources or moving money from South Africa to their respective countries, and see maybe from 2000, what was the rate? In 2010, what was the rate? 2020, what was the rate? How is it now? So over a period of, let's say, 25 years or 15 years, what has happened in terms of that business, and what does that say in terms of the economy? Because if you are going to have remittances going out, sent back to other countries, it means money is not circulating in our country. And we know to stimulate economic growth, you need money to circulate in the communities. But if you are going to have a drain in terms of the currency or the economy, what does that mean for the bigger scheme of things in terms of our economy?
You actually remind me, speaking about that, I attended G20 finance track meetings, the third one in Durban just recently, and there was a session around that of I think they termed it cross-border payments. Yeah. Actually, I've got a huge research report that I was shared. I'll actually share it with you. It actually speaks to that. That there's these remittances, there's this flow of money that is actually informal, that and the rate of exchanging money or the fees that are being charged are quite significant.
And it's one way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one way, by the way. Yes, it's one way, and it's very, very significant. I think they were estimating around just over 5% to 10%, somewhere there. Well, in terms of the international standards, it should be around somewhere there between 1 and 3%. So there's this huge market. And I saw now actually in the news when I was coming here, by the way, I saw that because even there, the governor was there in that commission, and they're actually looking at relaxation of the rules from Reserve Bank side, because I saw in the news, I think they're leaning towards that, so that there's a formalization of that. But unfortunately, I mean, we just spoke of syndicates. Unfortunately, one of the guys that research that sector, I forgot his name, one of the guys that he was part of the panel, in fact, he researched that space. He said, one of the things that makes that sector is going to make it very difficult, that even the banks don't understand that market, is the reliability, the usability of those syndicates. Those syndicates understand the psychology, they understand the clientele, such that even those that are more professionalized and you can remit your payments or online legal way, because there are other companies like Momo. I think MTN had a Momo, but still failed. It failed to penetrate South Africa because there's this market of remittance that is informal, that is so penetrated. These guys, like again, what you say, it's a one way, and the money is not circulating into the broader economy, like what you're saying. So it's a real big issue. It's quite a big issue that requires an attention, and we'll be monitoring that. Because it's quite a new big thing that is actually developing, that the country is also looking to pay attention to it. Maybe let's go back to the issue of the letter that you wrote to the Competent Commission. What are you hoping to achieve out of that, and how do you see that the outcome that you're hoping that will come out of that investigation? What you're proposing that the Competition Commission is undertake, and how do you see that benefiting the local traders?
There was a market inquiry done by the Competition Commission. I think a report was issued in 2019. So what we were basically calling for is to say, given what has transpired in the past 5 years, perhaps there needs to be a review of the state so that the Competition Commission is able to advise whether the problem has worsened or the problem maybe has been made better. And at the same time, there needs to be a case whereby the Competition Commission obviously does not have powers to, for example, law enforcement, SARS, taxation, and the others. But it would generate a report that speaks to saying, from a law enforcement perspective, these are the institutions that are failing, and this is what they need to do in order to remedy the situation. From a perspective of small business, this is what the small business legislatively is required to do. This is how they are failing. This is what they must do. Some form of recommendation, just like, for example, the public protector, they will issue a report. After issuing a report, they do not enforce the report or the recommendations on their own. But those recommendations are taken to other state institutions to say, this is what you need to do. So what we're hoping for is a multi-layered approach whereby all of the institutions that have got a role to play will be exposed to say they've let their guard down and this is what they need to do in order to make things right.
There seems to be this type of investigations now and then, but the recommendation seems not to be implemented. How can we ensure that these recommendations get to be implemented? Because it's not like, for example, SARS is not aware of illicit financial flows. I mean, why there seems to be not enough work being done in these areas? But for that matter, why are we not implementing this recommendation other than the lack of political will?
Yeah, perhaps it could be the issue of having people in some positions not being qualified or lacking the necessary expertise to be able to do the work. So what they will do, obviously, they are just going to tick a box. They're just going to do the bare minimum. They will not think at a broader level to say this is what they are going to do in order for them to actually get things right. So yes, lack of political will, lack of competence is the same thing. Perhaps the other issue it is having compromised individuals who, when they need to do the right thing, they know that maybe they may be exposed or things may not go out, may not come out in their favor if they do the right thing. So I think that's why in some institutions, people who are in power would rather have compromised individuals leading those institutions because they know once you've got a compromised individual heading up a certain institution, not much will be done. Therefore, they'll be safe. So I think those are the three reasons.
Maybe we spoke and we painted this negative picture, and we all know that unfortunately, as you provided reasons earlier, that it leads to high unemployment. And recently, I think 2 weeks back or a few days back, we saw the unemployment rate stats for Q2 being issued, jumping to 32.2%. How do you describe this situation? It's scary.
It is a ticking time bomb. If you go to the townships, because that's where majority of people live, you see the amount of people that are there in the streets. And you ask yourself as government now, these people are not at work. They are not at school. They are not in any training institution. What are they most likely to do? Chances are they are going to be involved in criminal activities. So the levels of unemployment has got, unfortunately, a ripple effect in terms of crime, in terms of the social ills that we find in the country. Hence, any logical government would have declared the high levels of poverty and unemployment a national disaster, so that there's a proper focus to say, how do we reduce unemployment? Remember when there was a COVID, departments used to communicate. Small business would say, in light of the lockdown, this is what must happen at a small business perspective. Department of Health from a health perspective. So there was that focus to say, here's a disaster, and this is the response department by department on this particular disaster. But when it comes to unemployment, it is just a matter of just speaking about how devastating it is, but there's no real tangible action to say we really want to get rid of this high unemployment level to an extent whereby we're going to do something that has never been done in our country. We're going to declare it a national disaster to give it weight in terms of the urgency and the priority, so that different departments, when it comes to whatever programs they may have, they need to occasionally communicate to the South African citizens to say, this is what we're going to do to reduce the unemployment.
But why it feels like, I'm speaking from being a citizen, to me it feels that there's no political will. Because I don't feel any change, but all I see is it's getting worse and worse when it comes to the unemployment. Why there's no that agency around this crisis? Okay, maybe to even describe it better, this national disaster.
The ANC, the only way in which it can retain their power or retain their votes, it is by keeping as many people as unemployed and in poverty as much as they can. Because they are going to come back as the ANC to the very same person systematically they've made poor and say, we've given you 350. That person will be so overjoyed with the 350 and will say, I'm going to vote you because you've given me 350. No one has ever given me 350 rands. They are going to go to a village full of hungry people, full of people who do not even know where their next meal is coming from. They are going to give them a t-shirt, and they are going to say, no, this is what we are going to do. So poverty and unemployment is structured, is a political strategy of the ANC to remain in power. There is no way of looking at the other way. Poverty and unemployment is a political strategy of the ANC to remain in power, because it keeps them in power by the very same poor people are going to vote for them, because even the results show people, when they move from being poor or being unemployed to the middle class, they also shift their votes, because being economically liberated, gives you a new perspective in terms of political choices. But once you are not, if you are not liberated economically, chances are your political choices will be constrained, and most likely you are going to vote for this party that gives you you're going to vote for this party that is in government, that the government is giving 350, because the ANC is not the one giving people 350 rands or grants or RDP houses. It is the taxpayers' money. But their communication, they are going to say the ANC government has done 1, 2, 3. So that is how they are doing it. So politically, that's the reason why there is no political appetite. But also from an economic point of view, our country is characterized economically by oligopolies, few companies that are dominating almost all industries and sectors of our economy.
Correct.
Whether it is banking, financial services, and etc. Therefore, what they would want, those particular, the few people that actually own the economy, they want to keep as many people as unemployed and in poverty as much as possible. Because once you have so many people in poverty and unemployed as much as possible, their occupation is getting their next meal. If I'm hungry, I'm not going to be thinking about who owns the banks and why is the ownership of the banks being a white minority. I'm not going to ask about the mines because my occupation is dityantone ebusuku. I don't have any occupation about transforming the economy. So that is why the ANC, in collaboration with these the owners of our economy, wants to keep people there, because once, for example, you've got a middle class, got a big high number of people in the middle class, then the questions will start arising, because a person who's got a stable income, has got a decent number of amount of savings, will ask the uncomfortable questions to say, but why are we having few companies dominating these particular industries? And their discourse in terms of putting pressure on us as the politicians will be to say, push for policies that will transform the economy so that you don't have an economy that is characterized by, number one, few families and individuals, number two, the issue of race. But a person olambileyo, they will never think that far, because indlala is forcing this person to say, utyantone ebusuku. So that is why unemployment and poverty is structural. It is designed. It is not a mistake. It is not something whereby a person can say, hey, if the government can do this, the government has got all of the necessary tools, but they will never be able to do those things for two reasons. Why? The first one is that once they do, they risk removing or reducing the electorate, the number of voters. Number two, these funders of political parties, it's not by mistake that the big and wealthy people in our country are funding political parties. They are funding political parties so that certain political parties, by the way, that they maintain the current economic structure. Because if these people were about democracy, they were going to deposit whatever amount to the democracy fund, and the IEC will just disperse to the 18 political parties in parliament. The fact that they target to say, we're going to give Rise Mzansi so many millions, we're going to give My Money so many millions, we're going to give the DA so many millions, they are giving to these parties so that these parties, whenever they speak, look at EDA, Rise, My Money, and all of these parties that are funded by one group of individuals, they'll never speak about the structural design of the economy. They're just going to speak about the cosmetic issues, but the root cause of our unemployment and poverty, it is structural. Hence, they are funded to make people to focus on the other things and not the root causes of our economic problems, which is the structural design of our country.
What needs to happen to really undo what you just alluded?
Firstly, people need to vote better. Thomas Sankara says, whoever funds you controls you. So people must understand that if you are voting for a party that is funded by a certain grouping, rest assured that grouping has got a significant influence in terms of the policies that party will advance. Therefore, you are not just voting for an individual that is speaking in the rallies. You are voting for the person with the purse behind him, and the person that is in that holds the purse behind him, unfortunately, wields more influence than you as a voter. Because whenever there's going to be a debate or a vote in parliament for anything, rarely do you have parties going maybe on social media asking for views on the people to say how should they vote. Instead, if you are funded by the Oppenheimers will give you a call and just remind you, there's this issue coming in parliament. My view is 1, 2, 3. You as a person who's been given X amount, millions of rands, you know that for you to keep on getting these monies, you need to continually appease your funder. So people need to vote better. And also they need to hold us accountable, because that's what we are in Parliament for. We're not there for our own interests. You need to hold us accountable and judge us in terms of what submissions do we make in Parliament, in terms of debates, in terms of, for example, now there was the constitutional review process. People need to ask, these parties, did they substantially, not a speech, because a speech is one thing, but in terms of a formal submission to say, this is what constitutionally must be amended. In terms of the motions, we as the ATM, we introduce a motion that there needs to be an ad hoc committee that will be established to investigate the collusion of the banks to fix the rent, because we wanted some form of justice, because many people lost their homes, they lost their cars and their entire livelihoods because greedy capitalist banks decided to manipulate their rent. So hold us accountable. We must not come to podcast. We must not go to rallies, speak this way. But where it matters the most, which is in Parliament, we are not backing up what we are saying when we're outside of Parliament.
Maybe speaking of this rent-wreaking case, I know that it is in front of, I'm not really following it up, but it's in front of the Constitutional Court. Maybe just unpack that. What is the context? How do you see it playing out?
So the context, it is banks, which is local international banks that colluded to fix the price of the rent, so that when there is that exchanges, the exchanges they work in a certain way which undervalues or depreciates the value, the rent, and that in effect would then mean that South Africans would need to pay more instead of paying what the market would say. So that is the true nature of the complaint. And it is interesting to note that the very same banks in other jurisdictions, they've been held accountable, but it is only in South Africa where there's no accountability. Again, it shows the level of control or influence capital has in South Africa, because you can't have a single case. The very same bank that is operating in the UK or America has been sanctioned in those two countries, but come to South Africa, nothing has happened.
That's quite surprising. But maybe let's go back to the issue of, I was watching the news in Eastern Cape, one of the tire manufacturer actually closing. What do we do? And I think that's an area that we also don't speak well about. We speak of those that may be unemployed, but we also don't address the issue of those who are losing jobs. Daily people are losing jobs. What support should we be giving these people? Because some of them get to be broken. Psychologically, some of them, families get to be broken as a result of that. What help should government really be providing to these people who are losing jobs?
I think the most help that the people need is not handouts from engaging people. People don't want handouts because they know that there's no dignity in waiting for the government to give you 350 and it ends there. People want to make a decent living by working. Therefore, the economy must be changed or transformed to be able to create jobs. And, the argument that we always advance as the ATM, it is the question of saying, why are we not using the existing infrastructure in terms of the factories? Because, everywhere, go to Kwakwa, there's infrastructure, factory. Go to Hammanskraal, go to Nkangala, almost each and every district, there's infrastructure point of view, there's the infrastructure is there. From a goods perspective, I can tell you now, people are going to use soap, toothpaste, toothbrushes, toilet paper, all of these basic goods on a daily basis. Meaning there is infrastructure and there are products that are in demand. What is needed is a government now that is going to say, we are going to fund industrialists or going to find business people that in each and every district, there must be production of these basic goods so that you don't have an economy that is concentrated in Gauteng or Cape Town, because if you go to Eastern Cape, for example, Amatole in the Gua area, there were factories there. You can operate from there. You can equally go to BCM, Dimbaza area. There's going to be factories. That way, you diversify the economy instead of the economy being concentrated in very few locations. And at the same time, you are going to be creating other means of making a living, because if you're going to be opening a factory, put aside the people that will be working in that factory, but there needs to be transportation for the people,
Correct.
Transportation for the goods, marketing for the goods as well. So it makes absolutely no sense for the government not to say they are going to embark on a manufacturing drive, because the issue with the economy is that we consume. I can tell you now where we are. If I can look at these t-shirts, the phones we're having, everything here in this room, chances are more often than not, it is manufactured in another country. Realistically speaking, if we are buying goods that are manufactured in China, we are creating jobs for China. So a logical government would say, how do we build capacity to manufacture goods locally, especially basic goods? Because we're not talking, for example, about sophisticated goods whereby we can question whether there's capacity or not. But toothpaste, toilet paper, a toothpick even, those are the things that people can do, can manufacture in their different localities. And I always make this example. I grew up in Msobomvu. From my house to the factories, I would walk hardly 5 minutes. And the people that were working there, our mothers, our fathers, our uncles, they were the ones that were working in that PEP. It was a PEP factory. When we go to town to buy whatever t-shirts or shorts, they were manufactured kwalapha, yabo. So it locally. So it would mean that jobs are created. And it does not need rocket science for a person to understand that from the time the ANC allowed the closing of those factories, jobs were lost in the process. And the only way in which we can create jobs, it is not by having superficial things. We need to get the basics right by saying, let's just produce the things that we consume. We're not going to be producing Teslas. Maybe we're only to find that only 5 people own Teslas in our country. But when you're producing the goods that we consume, the basic goods that are consumed on a daily basis, and the argument again that we're having as an ATM, you've got the spazas that will be the efficient distribution outlets. Because when you go to a spaza, what are you most likely to find there? You want to buy the goods that you're consuming on a daily basis. Your toilet papers, your toothpaste, and all of those things. Meaning, in each community, each ward will most likely have a minimum of 5 spazas. You imagine you've got a factory that is producing all of these goods, and then you've got spazas whereby after these goods are produced, the spazas are encouraged and are given support, but they are not going to be buying from other manufacturers. They must buy from the manufacturers in their respective locality. So that is how your localization. That is how you stimulate the economy, you create jobs, and you diversify the sources of employment. Unlike this case whereby for a person to be employed in our country, they either need to go to Cape Town, to Joburg or Durban. Whereas opportunities can be created in the different localities.
And people don't need to be traveling or to be migrating to the Joburg and Durban and Cape Town for that matter. You just gave practical examples of how to stimulate economic growth. But currently, as things stand, economy is not growing as we wish it should. And as a result, we are not collecting enough tax revenue. And that end up leading the National Treasury to go on a borrowing. And I think there's a political narrative around where National Treasury, there's a proposal. I think one of the political parties, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's EFF, if I'm not mistaken, submitted a proposed bill where they are saying that where National Treasury is it goes to go and borrow that particular loans and thing, and their borrowing needs to be approved by Parliament. There's a view on that, and I'll take your view on that. But I want you to reflect on something. I'm raising these because, as I mentioned earlier, that I attended a G20 finance track meeting. One of the segment there was when the former Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, actually presented on the debt level crisis in Africa. And he mentioned that of the African countries or the developing countries that are in Africa, 38% of them, they're actually spending 10% of their revenue, of their tax revenue collection on finance, rather paying for debt service costs, not even repaying the debt. It shows you how this is a crisis. But then you look at South Africa, by the way. Do you know that we spend more than 20% of our tax revenue really servicing our debt service costs? We're not paying that back, but we're paying the interest finance. So we are actually at double the average rate in Africa of those the details that I just mentioned earlier. Hearing all these, what's your reaction around this issue of debt level crisis, particularly in South Africa?
I think we need to call debt for what it truly is in the context of not only South Africa, but the countries that were previously colonized. We need to call debt what it is, that it is modern day slavery. It is a tool that is used by the people that previously colonized our countries to exert some form of influence in terms of our policies, so that we never truly reach a state of independence whereby you've got sovereign countries in Africa. When they are taking decisions, they're taking decisions as sovereign countries. Because if you are going to have countries being in so much debt, obviously institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF have got some form of influence in terms of the policies and the policy direction in which countries can embark on. Because of when you take debt from those institutions, there's some form of commitments that you need to make.
Correct.
So that is the I think the view that we need to view debt, that it is not a mistake. It is something that is done by our former colonizers to make sure that we never reach a level of independence. Because if Africa or South Africa can truly be independent to say, we've got these minerals, and this is how we're going to trade these minerals, then it would shake the entire world, because your USA, your Europe, and your China depend from the very same minerals that they get from Africa. But the issue is that because of these debt levels, there's no true independence whereby we can take sovereign decisions as to how do we leverage of our minerals, so that we are not just price takers in terms of the global economy, but rather we are the ones who are dictating to say these are the prices in which we are going to sell our minerals. So debt is something that is deliberate. It is structured. It is structured to keep us in the control or influence of these world institutions. And for us as a party, we've always stated that to be able then to reduce debt, you need independent parties that are going to truly, you need a party that will be in government that is truly into or genuinely into having an independent South Africa. Not have a South Africa whereby whenever we are going to wanting to take decisions, we need to, be influenced by what the Americans are saying or the British is saying, because that is what it is now. Look at all of this thing that has happened in the past 6 months or so. It is a level of interference that these countries, and they'll never want to interfere if they did not know they've got a leg to stand on. They've got a leg to stand on because the people that are running this country, you saw how President Ramaphosa and his delegation basically went to USA, to grovel and beg another president of another country as if we are subservient to America. And look at in comparison to how President Trump respects President Putin, because President Putin is a leader of an independent sovereign country. Unlike most of the countries, if not all of the countries in Africa, whereby we're not really sovereign. We can say we are sovereign, but we're not really sovereign. Also, we are not really independent because of the institutions. Because just like apartheid, when the people that were behind apartheid knew that it's no longer profitable to have that system, they had another manner in which they were going to design the country so that the system continues to benefit them, even though the word apartheid is no longer going to be used. That is why they funded the political parties. They funded most of these people, the ANC comrades, so that when they are in power, they will take decisions that will benefit them as a people who are benefiting from apartheid. It is similar to colonization, because the colonists, when they knew that it's no longer profitable to colonize countries, rather they introduce other means and mechanisms to continue reaping or benefiting from or exploiting these countries they were previously colonizing. Because colonization is more about exploitation, because they want to exploit resources and reduce any form of sovereignty and independence. So you can do that having a native of that country being a president, having natives of those countries actually running the departments, but the policies or the framework in which they are going to be running those countries under, it is to the benefit of the former colonizer. So that is what is currently happening when it comes to debt. So the solution, it is like we're saying that we need to have a government that is saying we want to be debt-free, or if we can't be debt-free, let's rather borrow from institutions that are like-minded, like BRICS, whereby we know that we are not going to compromise in terms of our policies and our policy direction. So that is what needs to happen.
But earlier on, I attended National Treasury Fiscal Policy, and they actually showed that what you're saying, like-minded institution, there seems to be a graph going towards that shows. But of course, we can do more. We can borrow more from there, because the view also from them is that it's actually cheaper to borrow from such institutions as compared to other traditional foreign. Maybe let me go back to, in dealing with these, addressing this debt level crisis in the country, these proposals of making sure that anything that gets to be borrowed by the National Treasury gets to be passed by Parliament. What's your party position on that?
Agree 100%. It is something that has been in our deliberations as a party to say, especially over the past few years, we've seen an increase in terms of loans from the IMF, the World Bank, all of these institutions. And there's no corresponding infrastructure that shows, okay, X amount was borrowed and this is the end result of it. Instead, we're just having an increase in terms of the debt service costs, but the actual benefit, we don't see it. And the government will hide behind the fact that they do not necessarily have to report to Parliament, or there's going to be any form of intervention, because for some of these loans they take, there's some conditions that affect me and you. And the argument, which we 100% agree with, to say, obviously you can't have a case whereby debt will be taken and some conditions will affect the people, yet the voices of the people, which is the parties in Parliament, there's no deliberate, there's not even a debate, and especially now in the context of no party having a majority, it would be something that would really lead to responsible borrowing, because parties would not want a case whereby the government is reckless when it comes to their borrowing.
Maybe one can argue and say perhaps that can delay the decision-making process within the working of the government.
Not necessarily, because you don't just wake up and say you wanted to borrow something tomorrow. At a basic level, for example, as a human being or as a South African, if you want to go to an airtime advance, 30 rand, that one you can easily do.
Correct.
But if you're wanting to go to a bank and borrow 50,000, obviously your decision-making process, it takes a while. So if the government thinks, okay, we are going to, because government should be characterized by proper planning. If they know that in 8 months they need to have a project and this project needs to be funded and this is where the funding needs to come from, they are not going to wake up 8 months later and only then approach the institutions. The time they should go to Parliament and say, this is what we are going to need money for 8 months from now.
Correct.
Can we have some form of deliberation in Parliament? Engage the Speaker to speed up the process of deliberations. It would not hinder the decision making. Rather, it would lead to more responsible decision making, because I think the reason why people are so careless when it comes to the borrowing is because they know the people that are going to be paying these tax, it is generations to come. Bona, they don't care. They've stolen so much money. And that is why you find that in many public spaces, the manner in which they use public funds, they would never use it the very same way if it was their own hard-earned money. Because with public funds, there's this superficial view, but I know it's taxpayers' money. But there's no appreciation in terms of South African citizens to know, when you wake up in the morning and, you go to work and you suffer under a toxic boss, you are actually funding these taxes. You are funding the government spending, whereby other people, the fruitless expenditure. Therefore, you must be outraged when you hear the Auditor General detailing how much it is, how much maladministration, wasteful expenditure is recorded per year. You should be outraged when a government just wakes up and say they are going to borrow 100 million from the IMF, and when you are going to be paying it, and you're not just paying it. You are paying it by waking up in the morning and suffering so much, because, if you look at your pay slip and you just look at that text line, you're going to see, in fact, I really hope that we reach a time as South Africans whereby every month we look at our pay slips and we look at that tax leg, that payee leg, and we say we're going to be outraged in terms of how the people that are in government are spending our money and how they are taking up more loans that will make me as a taxpayer need to pay more taxes to fund this wasteful expenditure we see.
Maybe in closing, you are calling for active citizenry.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that citizens are very, very active? What is it that you as ATM are going to be doing to ensure that there's this outrage that you're talking, what you're calling for activism, you're calling for alertness, you're calling for to say, hey, wake up, this is your money going down the drain.
Yeah.
In closing, what will you be doing? Have a conversation with the viewers.
What we've been saying, I went to some podcast and I said in that podcast, it's not the ANC that brought about the democracy that we see. It is actually the people that brought about the democracy, because it is the people that protested. It is the people that were in marches, they were boycotting. So it is the people that made it unprofitable for apartheid to continue. People were insulting me and etc., especially ANC people, simply because the ANC does not want people who are mentally liberated. Can you imagine a South Africa whereby the citizens know their power to say, if they remove the apartheid government, they can also remove this corrupt government of the ANC? Surely South African citizens would be more alive, would be more in tune, would be more eager, to actually get the country right, because they know their power. So it is psychological that the ANC is pushing for people to think that the people are nothing without them. Because if people can know and truly appreciate, it's like an elephant. Once an elephant knows its power, it can never be by a small boy. The reason why a small boy is able to play around or direct a big cattle or bull or any of these big animals is because the animal has not understood the true power in which they hold. So in this case, we've got South African citizens who've got so much power, but because they don't know their power, they allow a small minority of ANC people to dictate their lives. So what we are going to do, it's what we've been doing, coming to such podcasts, is to have such conversations. And our conversations as ATM is not to say, sit, it's all about us. We're saying, no, it's about you, because this is your country. It is you as a voter, as a citizen, that needs to do something to get the country right. And it is you as a citizen that needs to watch what is happening in Parliament. You need to be informed. What are the bills that are before Parliament, and how are those bills going to affect you as a person? What is happening in your country? You must not have citizens that are so aloof. They don't know whether we're coming or going. We must not have such citizens, because the ANC and their corruption thrives on such type of citizens.
Let me thank you so much, Ndate Vuyo. I really appreciate it for you for coming through. It's been amazing. 2 hours of really dialoguing, and we need to have these type of conversation more. Let's deliberate, let's engage beyond all these platforms to ensure that we really stimulate the economic growth. But for that matter, we root out this fruitless and wasteful expenditure because they come back, by the way, and eat into our pockets, whether we like it or not, because we see possible tax increases and things like that. But thank you so much, and we wish you well as ATM and you personally in your own life. Colleagues, thank you so much for watching. My name is Shilipo Mutiba. This was the Tax Awareness Show, but the Government Pulse segment. And I thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.